They said nothing dangerous ever survives a public auction. They were wrong. The station lights flickered in a slow, tired rhythm as Ethan Cole stepped over a loose cable and wiped grease from his hands, the air thick with recycled coolant and overheated circuits. 12 decks above the void, and still everything felt cramped, temporary, like the place itself knew it wasn't meant to last. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in this section, not near the central exchange where voices rose and fell in polished tones, bidding on things that should never have had a price. Ethan kept his head down, toolkit slung over his shoulder. Just another contractor chasing credits. Just another human trying to fix something broken. But then he heard it. Not a sound exactly. More like a silence that didn't belong. A gap in the noise that pulled at him. He glanced up and saw her. She stood behind a transparent containment field. Chains of pale energy wrapped around her wrists. Not struggling. Not pleading. Just watching. Her skin caught the cold light and bent it slightly, like it wasn't fully part of this world, and her eyes, steady, focused, locked onto him the moment he looked back. Ethan felt it then, a strange pause in his chest, like he'd missed a step going down a staircase. Don't, he muttered under his breath, forcing himself to turn away, because none of this was his problem. Because people like him didn't get involved in things like that. A voice boomed overhead, smooth and practiced, listing her attributes like she was equipment, rare, valuable, controlled. Ethan tightened his grip on the toolkit, jaw flexing. He'd seen broken engines, broken hulls, broken men, but something about the way she stood there, unbent, unafraid, made the whole place feel wrong. Another flicker of light, another pause in the air, and for a split second the crowd shifted uneasily, like something unseen had brushed past them. Ethan exhaled slowly and started toward a maintenance panel near the base of her enclosure, telling himself he was just doing his job, just checking a faulty circuit, nothing more. But as he knelt and popped the panel open, sparks briefly illuminating his face, he felt her gaze again, sharper now, closer. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, not sure if he meant her or himself. His fingers hovered over the control relays, the lock system humming softly beneath the metal, and for one long second, he hesitated. Then he heard it, not with his ears but somewhere deeper, a quiet certainty, calm and deliberate. She wasn't asking. She wasn't begging. She was waiting. Ethan swallowed, heart steadying in a way that didn't make sense, and without looking up, he cut the first connection. The hum shifted, barely noticeable, but the silence around her changed. The hum inside the panel dropped by half a pitch, subtle but wrong, like a heartbeat skipping a beat, and Ethan felt it in his fingertips before he heard it through the metal. He froze, breath held, listening as the auctioneer's voice continued above, smooth and confident, unaware that something small had already begun to shift. He should have stopped there, should have sealed the panel and walked away, collected his pay, and left this place behind like every other job that was not his business. But the silence around her deepened, pressing outward, and he could not ignore it anymore. He glanced up. She had not moved, not even an inch, but her eyes were different now, focused in a way that made the rest of the room feel distant, like everything else had become background noise. Ethan swallowed and reached for the second relay, fingers brushing the insulated wire, feeling the faint vibration of energy running through it. Just a glitch, he muttered, as if saying it out loud could make it true, as if he was still only fixing something broken. He disconnected the line. The containment field shimmered, barely visible, a ripple passing across its surface like heat over asphalt on a summer road. No alarms, not yet, just a shift. Behind him, a few voices hesitated, conversation stuttering for a fraction of a second before resuming. Ethan's pulse picked up. He was past the point of pretending now. He knew what this was. He knew what he was doing. He should have been afraid. Instead, there was a strange clarity, a quiet certainty settling into place. He looked up again. This time, she tilted her head slightly, the smallest movement, but it felt like a signal, not a request, not a command, something else entirely, recognition. The third connection was deeper in the system, protected, meant to be accessed only by authorized personnel. Ethan hesitated, hand hovering, mind racing through consequences he did not have time to fully consider. Security protocols, station lockdown, blacklisting, worse. He exhaled slowly. No one deserves to stand in a cage, he said. Under his breath, the words steady despite everything. His tool sparked as he bridged the override manually, bypassing the lockout. The system resisted for a second, then gave. The field flickered again, longer this time, the air around her bending in a way that made the edges of reality seem less certain. A low tone sounded somewhere in the distance. Not yet an alarm, just a warning buried deep in the station's systems. Ethan felt it vibrate through the floor. He pulled his hand back, heart pounding now, and pushed himself to his feet. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd continued. The lights flickered. The auctioneer spoke. And then the chains around her wrists dimmed, their glow weakening. Lines of energy unraveling like threads losing tension. She stepped forward, just one step. The field held for a fraction longer, then faded completely, not with a crash or a burst, but with a quiet absence, as if it had never been there at all. Ethan took a step back without thinking, breath catching as she crossed the boundary. Up close, the air around her felt different, cooler, heavier, like standing near a storm that had not yet broken. She looked at him, not surprised, not grateful, just certain. You chose to open the door, she said softly, her voice calm, measured, carrying a weight that did not belong to this place. Ethan shook his head slightly, trying to steady himself. I just fixed a problem, he replied, though the words felt thin even as he said them. Her gaze did not waver. For a moment, the noise of the station faded again, and all he could hear was his own breathing. Then, somewhere behind them, the warning tone sharpened, rising into something louder, something that would not stay quiet much longer. She glanced past him, just briefly, then back. Then we should not stay, she said, and for reasons he could not fully explain, Ethan nodded. The first alarm did not sound like panic, it sounded polite. A soft rising tone layered beneath the station noise as if asking everyone to remain calm. And that somehow made it worse. Ethan turned toward the nearest service corridor, instincts kicking in now, the kind that came from years of staying one step ahead of trouble, and he gestured for her to follow. She did, but not with urgency, not with fear, just a smooth, measured pace that made the crowd part without understanding why. People glanced at her and then away, confused, unsettled, as if their minds could not quite hold on to what they were seeing. Ethan felt it too, a pressure at the edge of perception, like trying to remember a dream that refused to stay still. This way, he said, keeping his voice low as he pushed through a maintenance door marked for authorized personnel only, the seal hissing open with a delay that felt longer than it was. The corridor beyond was narrow, lined with exposed conduits and dim emergency strips casting long shadows along the walls. The hum of the station grew louder here, closer to its bones. Ethan keyed the door shut behind them and leaned against it for a second, catching his breath. They are going to notice, he said, more to himself than to her. They already have, she replied, her voice unchanged, calm as ever. He looked at her then, really looked, trying to understand what he had just done, who he had just let loose into a place that was already on edge. Who are you? He asked. She did not answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer to the wall and ran her fingers lightly over a bundle of cables, not touching, just hovering, as if she could feel the current without contact. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Ethan frowned. That is not possible, he said under his breath. She turned her head slightly, considering him, and for a moment there was something almost curious in her expression. You opened a door that was not meant to open, she said, as if that explained everything. Ethan shook his head, pushing off the door. I opened a lock, he corrected, though he was no longer sure the difference mattered. The alarm shifted, louder now, no longer polite, a sharper edge cutting through the corridor. Somewhere deeper in the station, systems were waking up, noticing patterns that did not match expected behavior. Ethan checked the small display on his wrist unit, watching access points light up one by one as security protocols spread outward. We need to move, he said, stepping into the corridor and heading toward a junction that would take them closer to the docking bays. His ship was not much, just a patched-together freighter with more problems than it could count, but it was his, and right now it was the only way off this station. She followed without question, her presence just behind him, quiet but impossible to ignore. As they moved, Ethan became aware of something else, something subtle but growing. The way the air seemed to settle when she passed, the way the faint vibrations in the walls smoothed out, like the station itself was adjusting to her. He did not understand it, and that bothered him more than the alarms. They reached the junction, a four-way split with flickering directional signs, and Ethan slowed, scanning for the least monitored route. Before he could decide, she spoke again, softer this time. "Left," she said. He glanced at her. "How do you know?" he asked. She met his eyes, and for a brief second, the world seemed to narrow to that single point. "Because that is where you are going," she replied. It was not an answer, not really, but Ethan found himself turning left anyway, feet moving before his mind could argue. Behind them, the alarm rose another level, no longer contained, spreading through the station like a ripple. Ahead, the corridor stretched into shadow, and Ethan had the strange, undeniable feeling that he had already stepped too far to ever go back. The corridor narrowed as they moved deeper, the ceiling dropping just low enough to make Ethan aware of every step, every breath, the hum of power lines vibrating through the metal like a living thing. The alarms had changed again, no longer a steady tone but a layered signal that pulsed in intervals, directing attention, guiding response teams without needing words. Ethan knew that pattern, had heard it once before on a different station, and it meant one thing: containment escalation. "They are locking sectors," he said, glancing at his wrist display as access routes blinked from green to amber to red. Doors ahead were sealing in sequence, isolating movement, narrowing options. He adjusted course without slowing, turning into a side passage that maintenance crews used to bypass main corridors, his boots echoing against the grated floor. Behind him, she followed at the same calm pace, unaffected by the rising urgency, her presence steady in a way that felt almost out of place. Ethan pushed open another panel door and stepped into a vertical service shaft, ladders running up and down through dim light and drifting dust. "We climb," he said, already grabbing the rungs and pulling himself up. The metal was cold, slightly slick, but familiar. He climbed fast, counting distances in his head, estimating how far to the next deck. Halfway up, he paused just long enough to glance down. She was below him, not climbing in the same way, her hands barely touching the rungs, her movement smooth, controlled, as if gravity had less of a hold on her. He looked away quickly, unsettled by how natural it seemed to her. They reached the next level, and Ethan hauled himself through the hatch, rolling onto the deck with a sharp breath. The air here was cooler, filtered, closer to the docking ring. He pushed to his feet and keyed the hatch open for her. She stepped through without effort, eyes scanning the space in a way that made Ethan think she was not just seeing the corridor, but everything connected to it. "How much farther?" she asked. It was the first time she had asked him anything like that. Ethan pointed down the passage. 300 feet, maybe less. "My ship is in Bay 12, he said. He started moving. Again, faster now, the urgency catching up to him. The lights flickered overhead as power rerouted, and for a moment the corridor dipped into shadow before stabilizing. Ethan felt the shift again, that subtle change in the air when she moved, like the station was recalibrating around her presence. "You keep doing that," he said without looking back. "Doing what?" she asked. "Making everything quiet," he replied, searching for the right word and not finding it. She did not answer. Ahead, a security barrier slid into place with a heavy mechanical sound, blocking the main route. Ethan slowed, scanning for an override panel, already calculating how long it would take to bypass before he could reach it. The barrier hesitated, its movement stuttering, then stopping halfway. The lights along its frame flickered, cycling through colors that did not match any standard protocol. Ethan stared. "That is not me," he said quickly, almost defensively. She stepped beside him, looking at the barrier with mild interest. For a second, nothing happened. Then the panel beside it blinked green, and the barrier retracted smoothly as if it had never been an obstacle. Ethan let out a breath he did not realize he was holding. "We are not going to make it if the whole station turns on us," he said, pushing forward again. Her voice came from just behind his shoulder, softer now, closer. "It already has," she said. They reached the final turn, the corridor opening toward the docking bays, and Ethan could see the edge of his ship's hull through the wide bay doors, lights reflecting off its worn surface. Relief flickered in his chest, brief and fragile. Then he noticed the figures near the entrance. Silhouettes moving with purpose, waiting. He slowed, every instinct telling him the path ahead was no longer simple. Beside him, she stopped as well, her gaze fixed forward, unreadable. The air grew still again, heavier, like the moment before something changes. Ethan exhaled slowly. "This is where it gets complicated," he said. She tilted her head slightly, eyes never leaving the bay. "No," she replied, calm and certain. "This is where it becomes clear." The figures near the docking bay did not rush forward or raise their voices. They simply stood in place, spaced evenly across the entrance like a wall that had already decided it would not move. Their uniforms were clean, precise, their posture controlled, and the faint glow along their sleeves marked them as station security operating under full protocol. Ethan slowed to a stop a few steps short of the threshold, his mind running through options that all ended the same way. Blocked, contained, processed. He let out a quiet breath and lifted his hands slightly, not in surrender but in calculation, showing he was not reaching for anything. "Easy," he said under his breath, though he was not sure who he was saying it to. Beside him, she did not move at all. Her gaze remained fixed on the line ahead, not tense, not wary, just aware. One of the figures stepped forward a single pace, measured and deliberate, and a calm voice carried across the bay, amplified just enough to be heard without strain. "Remain where you are." The voice said, not aggressive, not uncertain, simply stating a fact. Ethan glanced at her, expecting some reaction, some shift, but she stood as she had before, still as a point of gravity. "They are not going to let us walk out," he said quietly. She answered without looking at him. "They believe they are deciding that," she said. The lights above flickered again, longer this time, and Ethan noticed something else. The way the air in the bay felt different, as if the vast space had drawn a slow breath and was holding it. The security line adjusted slightly, not stepping closer, but tightening their formation in a way that suggested readiness without escalation. Ethan's eyes moved to his ship, parked less than 100 feet away, its hull marked by years of travel, its access ramp still closed, so close that he could picture the worn controls beneath his hands, the familiar hum of its engines, the simple, human certainty of leaving. He swallowed that thought and focused on the present. "We can try another route," he murmured, already knowing there was no time for that. The alarms had reached a steady intensity now, no longer changing, just constant, like a clock that had stopped counting and started waiting. She took a step forward, just one. The movement was small, but it shifted something in the space between them and the line ahead. Ethan felt it immediately, a subtle pressure, like. The air had grown denser, more deliberate. The nearest figure hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, and in that moment Ethan realized this was not about force or resistance. It was about something else entirely. She did not raise her voice, did not change her expression. She simply looked at them. The lights along the bay dimmed slightly, not failing, just lowering, as if the station itself was adjusting its focus. Ethan's pulse slowed in spite of everything, a strange calm settling over him that did not feel like his own. "What are you doing?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Her answer came just as soft. "Allowing them to see clearly," she said. The line ahead did not break, but it shifted again, subtle changes in stance, in balance, in certainty. Ethan could not explain it, but he could feel it. The way hesitation spread without a word being spoken. His gaze flicked between them and her, trying to understand the shape of what was happening. She took another step, closing the distance by a few feet, and the space seemed to open for her, not physically, but in intent. Ethan followed without thinking, drawn forward by a momentum he did not fully control. No one reached for him. No one blocked his path. And that was what unsettled him the most. They were not stopping him. Not yet. Not because they could not, but because something in the moment had shifted just enough to make them wait. And in that fragile pause, Ethan realized they were no longer just trying to escape. They were walking into something far larger than a locked door or a guarded exit. The distance between them and the line of security closed one quiet step at a time, not with resistance, but with something far more unsettling, a shared hesitation that neither side could fully explain. Ethan could hear his own breathing again, steady but louder now in his ears, each step echoing against the polished floor of the docking bay, the space wide and open, yet somehow feeling smaller with every second. The figures ahead did not retreat, but they did not advance either, their formation holding while something invisible passed between them, a ripple of uncertainty that moved faster than any command. Ethan kept walking because stopping felt like the wrong choice, even if he could not say why. Beside him, she moved with that same calm certainty, her presence shaping the air in ways that made the moment stretch, as if time itself had slowed to watch. "This is not normal," Ethan said quietly, more to anchor himself than to question her. "No," she replied, her voice soft but clear. "It is simply honest." The nearest officer shifted his stance again, not aggressive, not defensive, just adjusting to something that no longer fit within his training. A panel near the bay entrance flickered, its interface cycling through commands too quickly to follow before settling into a neutral state. Ethan noticed it without fully understanding, his mind trying to connect patterns that refused to align. "They should be stopping us," he said. "They believe they are," she answered, and there was something in her tone now, not amusement, not arrogance, but a quiet certainty that made Ethan's chest tighten. Another step, then another, and suddenly they were close enough to see details, the slight tension in the officer's shoulders, the way their eyes tracked movement but never quite settled, as if their focus was being pulled in more than one direction at once. Ethan slowed, not out of fear, but because the moment demanded it, the air thick with something unspoken. "We do not have to go through them," he said, glancing toward a secondary exit that might still be open. She did not follow his gaze. "There is no through," she said. "Only what they choose to see." Ethan frowned, trying to make sense of words that felt more like a description than an explanation. The lights above dimmed again, softer this time, like a breath exhaled, and for a heartbeat the entire bay seemed to pause, suspended between one decision and the next. Then one of the officers lowered his stance by a fraction, not stepping aside, not signaling, just releasing something he did not know he was holding. It was enough. Ethan felt it, that shift, small but real, and without thinking he stepped forward again. No one reached out, no one spoke. The line did not break, but it opened just enough for two people to pass. Without being stopped, Ethan walked through that space, aware of every inch, every second, expecting at any moment for the illusion to collapse, for hands to grab him, for alarms to spike into something louder. But none of it came. He reached the other side and turned, half expecting to see the line close behind him, but instead they remained as they were, still, uncertain, caught in a moment that had not resolved. She stepped through last, her gaze lingering on them for a brief second before turning away. "They will remember this," Ethan said quietly, not sure if it was a warning or an observation. "Yes," she replied, "and so will you." Ahead, his ship waited, silent, unchanged, a piece of ordinary reality in the middle of something that no longer felt ordinary at all. Ethan moved toward it, faster now, the spell of the moment beginning to thin, replaced by urgency that returned like gravity after a fall. As he reached the ramp controls, his hand hovered for a fraction of a second before activating them, the mechanism responding with a familiar hum as the ramp lowered. He exhaled sharply, the sound grounding him again. "Get inside," he said, stepping aside to let her pass. But she did not move immediately. Instead, she looked at him, really looked, as if measuring something deeper than distance or time. "You still think this was about escape," she said softly. Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the statement. "Is it not?" he asked. She stepped forward then, crossing the threshold of his ship without hesitation, her presence filling the space in a way that made it feel both smaller and more complete. As she passed him, her voice dropped just enough that only he could hear it. "You opened the door," she said, "and now you are part of what comes next." The ramp sealed behind them with a low mechanical thud, cutting off the noise of the station like a door closing on a different world, And for a moment, Ethan just stood there at the base of his own ship, hand still hovering near the control panel, listening to the familiar hum of systems coming alive around him. It should have felt normal, grounding, but it did not. Something had followed them inside, not physically, not in any way he could point to, but in the way the air seemed to settle differently, like the ship itself was aware of a presence it had never carried before. "Stay here," Ethan said automatically as he moved past her toward the cockpit, his voice steady out of habit more than certainty. He climbed the short ladder into the pilot's seat, fingers moving over switches and screens, bringing systems online in a practiced sequence, engines warming, navigation waking, shield cycling. Through their checks, everything responded the way it always did, predictable, mechanical, human, and yet the readouts flickered just slightly at the edges, numbers stabilizing a fraction faster than expected, systems syncing with an efficiency that made him pause. He frowned, tapping one of the displays, expecting resistance, delay, something familiar to anchor him. Instead, the interface cleared smoothly, almost eager. "That is new," he muttered. Behind him, he could hear her footsteps, soft, against the metal floor, approaching but not intruding. She stopped just short of the cockpit threshold, not sitting, not touching anything, simply observing. "Your vessel is resilient," she said, as if choosing the word carefully. Ethan let out a short breath that might have been a laugh if he had the energy for it. "That is one way to describe it," he replied, eyes scanning the external feeds. The docking bay was still there, still occupied, the figures near the entrance holding position. But none of them were moving toward the ship. None of them were signaling interception. It was as if the moment they had passed through had not yet fully resolved. "They are not stopping us," Ethan said, more to confirm it than to question it. "They cannot decide how," she answered. Ethan glanced back at her, irritation flickering beneath the tension. "People do not just forget their jobs," he said. She met his gaze, calm as ever. "They are not forgetting," she said. "They are seeing more than one outcome at once." Ethan stared at her for a second, then shook his head and turned back to the controls. "That is not how anything works," he said, pushing the throttle system into standby. The engines responded instantly, a smooth rise in power that felt almost too clean. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the final release. "You keep talking like this is something bigger," he said, quieter now. "But I just needed to get off this station." She stepped closer then, just enough that he could feel her presence behind his shoulder, not touching, but close. "And you will," she said. "But that is not all that is happening." Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing his focus back to the task. "Dock control is going to notice any second," he said. "They already have," she replied, echoing her earlier words. He did not argue this time. Instead, he initiated the release sequence. The clamps disengaged with a series of heavy clicks, vibrations running through the hull as the ship shifted free from the dock. Outside, the vast curve of the station loomed, lights stretching into the distance like a web of cold stars. For a moment, nothing stopped them. No override command, no forced shutdown, no sudden closure of the bay doors, just open space waiting beyond. Ethan pushed the throttle forward, slowly at first, guiding the ship out of the bay, every instinct expecting resistance that never came. The ship cleared the threshold, and the stars opened up ahead, endless and silent. Ethan let out a breath he had been holding since the moment he saw her. "We made it," he said, almost disbelieving, behind him. She was quiet for a long second. Then her voice came, softer than before, but carrying more weight than anything she had said yet. "No," she said. "We began it." The stars did not rush past the viewport the way they should have. They held their positions just a fraction longer than expected, as if space itself was taking a second look at the ship that had just entered it. Ethan noticed immediately, his hands tightening slightly on the controls as he adjusted the vector, expecting resistance, drift, something that would confirm normal physics was still in charge. Instead, the ship responded with an almost perfect alignment, engines humming at a frequency that felt too smooth, too precise. "That is not right," he said quietly, eyes scanning the navigation panel. The coordinates stabilized faster than any system he had ever flown, predictive paths locking in before he finished inputting them. Behind him, She remained standing, her reflection faint in the glass, watching the stars rather than the instruments. "You feel it," she said, not as a question. Ethan let out a slow breath, forcing himself to focus. "I feel something," he admitted, "and I do not like it." He adjusted the throttle, pushing the ship into a wider arc away from the station, putting distance between them and the structure that still loomed behind like a silent witness. The station did not pursue, did not signal, did not react in any visible way. It simply remained, suspended against the black, as if what had happened inside it had not yet decided how to exist. Ethan frowned at the display. "They should be calling this in, flagging us, locking down traffic lanes," he said. "They are trying," she replied softly. He glanced back at her again, frustration threading through his voice. "Trying is not how systems work," he said. "They either do or they do not." She stepped closer to the viewport, her presence shifting the light just enough to make the stars seem sharper, more defined. "Your systems see one path," she said. "Theirs see many, and now they do not agree." Ethan shook his head, turning back to the console. "That is not possible," he repeated, though the words carried less certainty than before. He initiated a jump calculation, fingers moving quickly across the controls, selecting a random coordinate outside standard lanes, somewhere quiet, somewhere he could think. The system accepted the input instantly. No delay, no correction, no warning about fuel optimization or route efficiency. It simply complied. Ethan paused, staring at the screen. "It should not do that," he said. "It is adapting," she answered. He leaned back slightly, tension building behind his ribs. "To what?" he asked. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she lifted her hand, not touching the console, just hovering near it. And for a brief second the interface flickered, lines of data shifting into patterns that Ethan could not fully process, as if the system was speaking a language he had never learned. Then it settled again. "Normal, readable, familiar. To you," she said at last. Ethan stared at the display, then at his hands, then back at her. "I did not change anything," he said. "You opened the door," she replied, her voice steady. That was enough. The words hung in the air, heavier now, carrying a meaning that extended beyond the ship, beyond the station, into something Ethan could feel but not define. Outside, the stars shifted again, subtle but undeniable there. Positions adjusting in a way that made the space ahead look closer. Ethan felt it then, not just in the instruments but in his chest, a quiet pull, like gravity without mass. "What is happening?" he asked, the question finally breaking through everything else. She looked at him, not with distance this time, but with a focus that felt almost personal. "You chose to act without asking what it would cost," she said. "And now the cost is being revealed." Ethan swallowed, the weight of her words settling in. "And what does that mean for me?" he asked. She held his gaze for a long second, then stepped even closer, close enough that he could feel the subtle shift in the air between them. Her voice dropped, softer, but clearer than anything else in that moment. "It means you are no longer separate from what you touched," she said. The ship's systems chimed quietly, signaling readiness for the jump, but Ethan did not move. He was still looking at her, still trying to understand. Outside, the stars seemed to lean inward, as if waiting. And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Ethan realized that leaving the station had not taken him away from the unknown. It had carried him directly into it. The jump indicator pulsed once, soft and patient, waiting for a command that Ethan did not give. His hands rested on the controls, but they felt distant now, like they belonged to someone who had been here before this moment, before the station, before her. The stars outside the viewport no longer felt like distant points of light. They felt arranged, intentional, as if space itself had become aware of being observed. Ethan swallowed slowly, his throat dry, his mind trying to anchor itself to something solid, something familiar. "If I do not jump," he said quietly, "what happens?" The question lingered in the air between them, heavier than the silence that followed. She did not answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward until she stood beside him, close enough that he could see the faint shift of light across her skin, like a reflection that did not belong to any visible source. "You already have," she said at last. Ethan frowned, his brow tightening as he looked back at the controls, at the coordinates, still waiting for confirmation. "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "I am still here." She turned her gaze toward the stars, and for a moment, the reflection in the viewport did not match her position exactly, as if there was more of her than the eye could hold. "Location is not the same as position," she said. Ethan let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You keep saying things like that," he said, "but I need something real." She looked at him then, and this time there was no distance in her expression, no detachment, only a quiet clarity that felt almost gentle. "You made a choice without asking who I was," she said, "without asking what it would change." Ethan held her gaze, something steadying in his chest despite everything. "Because it was the right thing to do," he replied. She studied him for a long second, as if measuring the weight of that answer. Then she nodded, once, slowly. "Yes," she said, "that is why it worked." The words settled into him, not as explanation, but as confirmation of something he had not known he needed. The ship chimed again, the jump system still ready, still waiting. Ethan looked back at the controls, then at the stars, then at her. "So what now?" he asked. Her answer came without hesitation. "Now you decide again." Ethan's fingers moved before his mind fully caught up, canceling the preset coordinates, clearing the path the system had offered. The display blinked, recalculating, opening a blank field where no destination had been chosen. Outside, the stars shifted once more, not pulling, not pressing, just present. Ethan felt the difference immediately. The absence of that quiet pressure, replaced by something else, something that felt like space had stepped back and was waiting. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. "You are not going to tell me where to go," he said. She shook her head, a small, almost human gesture. "That is not mine to choose," she replied. Ethan studied her, then nodded to himself, a decision forming not from fear or confusion, but from something simpler, something he understood. He reached for the controls again, this time entering coordinates by hand. Not perfect, not optimized, just a direction that felt right. The system accepted it without hesitation, the hum of the engines deepening in response. He glanced at her one last time. "You said I opened a door," he said. She met his gaze, her eyes steady, unreadable and yet somehow warm. "You did," she answered. Ethan nodded once, then pushed the command. The stars stretched, light bending into motion as the ship entered the jump. For a brief second, everything became silent, not empty, but full in a way he could not describe. And in that silence, he felt it. Not fear, not regret, but a strange, quiet certainty that whatever lay ahead was not something he had been dragged into. It was something he had chosen. Beside him, she did not look away, her voice barely more than a breath as the light wrapped around them. "You are mine, human," she said, not as a claim of ownership, but as a recognition, and Ethan did not pull away. Outside, the stars disappeared into white, and for the first time since he had stepped onto that station, he did not feel lost, he felt seen.